Story 1. Being cheated on for 8 years, knowing the entire time, and being too afraid to do anything about it crippled me for years. I am still recovering a few years later. Story 2. Years of depression and anxiety drained all my motivation. I have finally found something I believe I can pursue, but now getting started feels impossible. I never developed the mental tools to actually follow through. Story 3. I was running for high political office, bombarded with information and requests constantly. I was also working a full-time job and driving hundreds of miles after work to give political speeches. I had to keep up with fundraising and social media, and I was drinking an entire bottle of wine every night to cope with the chaos. Everyone believed they had a right to my time every moment of every day. It was unreal and entirely maddening. Story 4. I was kidnapped by 3 men in Sri Lanka and ended up on a raft in the middle of a river. I jumped off when they were distracted and swam as fast as I could to shore while they rowed after me. I ran up the riverbank to a nearby bank and took shelter with a security guard who called the police. The men were never caught. Story 5. My mom was dying, I needed a roof on my house, and I required a loan for the roof. I had to move my dad in with me and had no coworkers at work, which meant all the load was on me. I also had an unsupportive spouse. That was March to April 2024. I didn't sleep for months. Story 6. I had a panic attack in my classroom, and the kids were laughing at me while I could hardly breathe. Story 7. Leaving an abusive relationship was a terrifying experience. The fear of what might happen if I got caught before I was able to leave was overwhelming. Story 8. During my first year as an anesthesia attending, I was performing a simple sedation surgery on an otherwise healthy woman in her 20s. At the end of the case, as we were moving her to the stretcher, the monitor that detects oxygen levels in her blood was not reading accurately. I assumed it was due to motion artifact, which is commonly the case when moving a patient. However, the blood pressure cuff, which I would have normally disconnected at that point, was also having trouble detecting a measurement. That was not a good coincidence, and my instincts kicked in. I instructed the nurses to stop touching her and let the blood pressure cuff get a reading while I adjusted the pulse oximeter. She had dark skin, making it difficult to assess for cyanosis, but things did not look good. The cuff was cycling and seemed confused. I felt for a carotid pulse and could not detect one. I asked the resident and the nurses if they could feel it, and they reported they could not either. My concern escalated rapidly, and I instructed them to call for help, start compressions, and bring everyone in. I administered epinephrine, intubated her, and had someone assist me with placing a central line and performing an echocardiogram as I managed the code. We regained a pulse within 10 minutes. The echocardiogram revealed an active clot in transit within her right ventricle. We called a cardiovascular surgeon who opened her chest, placed her on bypass, and performed a pulmonary embolectomy. She survived and was discharged from the hospital within a week. I often reflect on that case and what might have happened if I had not recognized those signs and instead brought her to the recovery room, which would have delayed her care by another 5 to 10 minutes. Story 9. College finals online, especially when the link doesn't work and there are only a few hours left to take it. Story 10. My 13-year-old stepson asked to go for a drive, which meant he had something troubling him that he wanted to discuss. We were quite different, and I always cherished those car rides because they were one of the few ways we had to bond. I didn't cherish this one. He told me his biological father was a methamphetamine addict who often got high when my son was around. To feel closer to his biological father, he confessed that he had been taking drugs. Marijuana, cocaine, acid, and Xanax, in order to have more in common with him. He was scared of the direction his life was taking. He had tried getting clean but found it hard because all his friends did drugs. So he wanted to live with his grandmother to attend a different school district. I had never felt so inadequate in that moment. I have a psychology degree and knew what not to do. Don't berate or punish the child for admitting to a problem he couldn't handle and asking for help. But I didn't know what to say. Then things went from bad to worse. He told me he didn't want me to tell his mother. I didn't feel it was ethical to keep such critically important information from her. I knew he had trust issues, and it would damage our relationship if I didn't keep his secret. I told him I couldn't do that. It was 10 years before he asked to go for another car ride. That was 16 years ago, still the worst moment of my life. He's turned into a fine young man, I'm happy to say, though quitting the hard drugs ended up not being as simple as moving in with his grandmother. That took a few years, some legal trouble, and 2 weeks in juvenile detention to get turned around. Story 11. Being in high school with debilitating ADHD has made it challenging to accomplish anything, even projects I am passionate about. I have started focusing on simply earning a diploma rather than achieving good grades, which has helped a bit, but it is still an absolute nightmare. Story 12. When my boss was constantly bullying and exerting power over me, it caused my coworkers to do the same. Story 13. Nothing specific comes to mind, but there are days when a lot of unrelated absurdities that are out of your control occur all at once. Today was a bit like that. Story 14. My last year of university was very stressful as I was about to graduate. I experienced a mental breakdown and had suicidal thoughts, which led me to seek medication. That was 9 years ago, and I am still not fully over it. Story 15. 3 years ago, my dad fell down the steps at home. My mom called to let me know that the ambulance was there, taking him to the hospital, and she would be on her way. She called me back 20 minutes later to tell me she did not feel well, took a test, and tested positive for COVID-19, so I had to go. While there, the doctor informed me that he had broken his hip and needed surgery. However, due to his other health problems, they were not optimistic about his chances of surviving the surgery. If he did not have the surgery, he would be in extreme pain for the rest of his life and would not even be able to roll over. The nurse then came in and informed me that my dad also had COVID-19. They needed a decision, but I could not reach my mom or my brother, so I had to decide whether to allow my dad to go into surgery with COVID-19 or let him experience pain. I chose surgery and he lived for another year. Story 16. Watching my sister deteriorate from pancreatic cancer has been painful. I saw her lose her hair and weight from not eating. I bought her different foods from the store to see if she could eat anything. I know she tried. She told me she was scared, and I regret not being there when she passed. Story 17. 5 years ago, I was building a house and working 70 hours a week when I discovered that my wife of 10 years was cheating on me. This situation led to a divorce while I was in the process of building a house, moving back in with my parents, seeing a therapist, and still working 70 hours a week. The house I was building ended up being sold from under me because the builder was afraid I would back out, even though I could easily afford it myself since my wife had never worked. That was painful. I had hired an architect for the design and spent countless hours selecting everything from flooring to appliances, which all became a waste of time and money. Now, I work a regular 40 hours a week and live in a small house in another city. I am still single, and life couldn't be better. Story 18. A tornado destroyed our dream home, and we are trying to find alternative living arrangements for my wife, my 14-month-old child, my 14-year-old child, and myself in a rural area. Story 19. My wife received a diagnosis of breast cancer about 5 years ago. She is in remission now, but for about 2 years, I didn't get any regular sleep. We have 3 small children, and I was up at night trying to figure out what I would do if she didn't survive. I aged about 10 years in too. Story 20. When everything in my life overwhelmed me. Grief, health issues, financial stress, and toxic people I couldn't escape. I felt like I was drowning with no way out. I couldn't think straight, barely slept, and everything felt like too much. But somehow I got through it. Not magically or gracefully, just one brutal day at a time. Looking back, I'm still not sure how I held on, but I did. And that matters. Story 21. The death of my mother and dealing with the probate court have strained relationships with my siblings for over 35 years as they believe they are entitled. Story 22. Working as a teacher, especially during the first 3 years, involves no downtime. You are either grading papers, being observed, filling out paperwork, staying up to date with the required professional development credits to maintain your license, writing and editing lessons, modifying lessons for special education students, planning lessons, writing tests, managing unruly students, and supporting students with anxiety or personal challenges. You also attend individualized education program meetings, among other responsibilities. It is essential to be on, as you must be your student's biggest cheerleader. Otherwise, you risk losing them even before the lesson begins, regardless of your personal circumstances. Sometimes you deal with these challenges all at once, and other times in spurts, but the demands never cease. Story 23. Trying to recover after dealing with a narcissist took me a long time to realize I wasn't the problem. But he was very good at making me think it was all my fault. Story 24. My family has continuously undermined my career, peace, and energy. Friendships have been difficult since my childhood. While they supported me as a kid, as an adult, I faced slander, theft, violence, abuse, neglect, and psychological manipulation. Everything had a pivotal twist and underlying motivation that was never in my best interest. Even family, friends, and godparents seemed to harbor jealousy. This behavior has stemmed from slander and hearsay. Story 25. I went to jail for substance abuse, and my child died the day I got out. I went through 3 years of deep depression, which ended in me attempting to take my life a month ago. I am doing better now, but that was the darkest time in my life. I tried to live stream my suicide attempt because I wasn't thinking, and now everyone I had in my corner is no longer there. They are upset because I live streamed it. Story 26. I was 50 days into a new job, administering national exams across the country when a server problem caused a system failure for almost all students. The next day, it happened again on the third day. It was a challenging lesson in crisis management. Story 27. A car clearly did not see me when I was riding my motorcycle quickly on the highway and veered into my lane inches from hitting me. I was forced to pull into the median and slow down to a complete stop for fear of hitting debris and skidding out. That was unpleasant, although I was fine. Story 28. Watching my newborn turn blue from lack of oxygen and be taken away by a trauma team. Seeing that same child, at age 10, violently vomit blood and require emergency surgery while bravely trying to comfort me. Hearing from an orthopedic specialist that this child, now 11, will probably need surgery around age 16 to prevent their patella from constantly sliding to the sides, and that sports, including dance, are completely off the table. Story 29. Being left out of my family and all the drama really bothered me. I was becoming so overwhelmed that I couldn't hold it together. It wasn't until I started chatting with my coworkers and received their support that I began to regain my footing and feel a sense of comfort amidst the chaos. Story 30. I was an only child raised by a single mother. She was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer shortly after my second child was born. At the time, my children were 4 and 1 years old, and the doctors had missed the advancement of her breast cancer. I was learning a new, extremely stressful, fast-paced job, taking 2 college courses to further my education, dealing with hacking and fraud on my accounts, and experiencing drama from friends who betrayed me out of insecurities, especially since I had just bought a new house while they were still living with their parents or in apartments. I had just turned 30, and I noticed my first signs of balding. Additionally, I had to set up her will and handle other important matters instead of spending time with her in her final days because she did not know how to do these things until I informed her. While all this was happening, strangers were being disrespectful and rude to me because of the world crisis, and everyone was on edge. I was also planning a wedding with my wife for 2 months after my mother passed away. She didn't even get to attend my wedding because she had died, and my half-siblings and father missed the event due to fears about the virus. This was during the peak of the COVID-19 crisis, so everything related to her estate was taking longer than expected. The funeral staff wouldn't even allow my loved ones into the funeral or let them hug me because of the virus. Amid all this, I was trying to repair her home and manage 2 mortgages. There was more going on, but these were the major stressful situations. Everything else felt like crazy side quests. For example, my cousin called me in the middle of my workday because she had locked herself out of her car. It turned out she had animosity towards me too, but waited until I helped her to reveal it. Story 31. Watching my dad pass away in hospice from cancer was an incredibly stressful situation. The memory of him taking his last breath will haunt me forever. Story 32. The times I have been so sick that I had to be hospitalized and didn't have anyone to give me a ride, buy me medication, or buy me food were difficult. I had to tell the hospital I had someone at home because I was in danger of a relapse so someone could call an ambulance for me. But I literally had no one. Story 33. Postpartum depression and stress really affected my emotions significantly. I hated being left alone with my toddler and newborn after my husband said he was going away for 3 weeks and didn't return for 6 months. I was in a very low place, crying and feeling anxious while handling a new baby and trying to give attention to my toddler, all while managing the household. I am now in a much better mindset after overcoming that darkness. Yes, I still have some low days, but I always remind myself that this is temporary and tomorrow will be better. We have a routine that helps me and the kids. I am grateful for family living nearby and my brothers being there for support. Story 34. Yesterday, I used protection during sex but still had a pregnancy scare for the first time. It was a stressful moment, and I had to act quickly. Story 35. We moved house and had a wedding last year. Considering the house was a complete disaster, the challenges of wedding planning, my wife being made redundant a month before the wedding, and then developing severe anxiety, it was a stressful year. This continued into January and February as well. I'm glad it's over. Story 36. Intense paranoia followed an empty death threat from people at work with connections. This tipped me into a paranoid psychosis. The constant pressure on my mind, fearing that I might be targeted by a gang, was excruciating and long-lasting. Every second for months, my mind was alert to motorcycles, imagining how they might be used to intimidate me. Each time I heard one, I tensed up, thinking my death was imminent. I would wake from dreams, sitting up abruptly, both thinking and feeling overwhelmed. This is the only way, as an unemployed person, that I could relate to a typical Special Forces soldier. Story 37. At the top of my head, as I am in a departure hall now, I was leaving my home country and arriving in another when the COVID lockdown was announced. The entire journey from the drop-off to arrival was very stressful. Story 38. When my friend came to me crying about a guy, the same guy she took from me a month earlier, I realized therapy is outdated. Now I just laugh into my pillow. Story 39. The most stressful thing is realizing you are opening your soul to a friend who is just collecting ammunition for later. A friendship game with your vulnerability as the prize. Story 40. This January, my long-distance best friend was close to the California wildfires. I live in Wisconsin. All I could do was constantly ask for updates and stress read. I read 6 books in 5 days, barely ate, drank or slept, cried, and prayed more than I had in years. I experienced a crisis of faith in my early 20s. My shoulders were practically up by my ears, and I was sore for days afterward. Everything was fine, and thankfully she didn't have to evacuate, despite being told to be ready at any moment. This experience has likely taken years off both our lives, and I tear up just thinking about it, but I'm still so glad she's okay. Story 41. Most stressful situation. The day my surgeon told me I had breast cancer. I was only 31 years old and was there alone. Always take someone with you when getting test results. Story 42. The worst year and a half of my life. April, I had a medical abortion at 24 weeks because the baby had no kidneys. We lived 1,000 kilometers away from our support network of family and friends since we moved for my partner's work. This was a very hard and isolating time. October, I found out I was pregnant again. We had been engaged for a while and decided to have a simple, quick wedding to bring some joy back into our lives. November, a week before the wedding, my partner came home from the office Christmas party with scratches on his back. It turned out he had cheated throughout our 7-year relationship and currently had 6 women involved. He wanted to be with one of them and ended our relationship. I had to explain this to both our families, as he refused to talk to them about it. December, since we lived together and had a son, and it was Christmas with no way to organize a rental. I stayed in the same house as him and put on a happy face for our child. I flew down to spend time with my family. While I was there, I received a call from my ex. He had parked our only car outside the other woman's house during the night, and it was crashed into. January, I moved to a lovely beachfront apartment. All went well with the pregnancy, and I hoped this would be the start of a stable and relaxing time. I was later diagnosed with gestational diabetes. February, the water pipe for the dishwasher burst and flooded the apartment, affecting the one below. I moved back into the old house I shared with my ex while he stayed with the new woman. Most of my belongings remained at the apartment as I was told we could move back in within 2 weeks. After months of following up, I finally moved back in. I was anxious as the baby was due soon. June, I had the baby. My ex lived with us for 2 weeks to help, but spent most of the time taking our son to be with the new woman while I looked after a newborn. August. I thought enough was enough and decided to move back 1,000 kilometers to be with my family. The day before our flights, the removal company reneged on our booking. I was supposed to have the apartment vacant 2 days later. I had paid to have it professionally cleaned after my departure. I couldn't cancel the flights as I had no money to book new ones. I threatened the company with all the determination a sleep-deprived mother could muster, and they agreed to collect our belongings the next day. My ex helped by agreeing to meet with them. August, Part 2. The removalists lost my things. After many frustrating calls, my belongings arrived 2 weeks later. I spent that time with my elderly parents, a 4-year-old, and a newborn. By the time the removalists finally showed up, I was at the end of my rope. The truck arrived with only one older man to unload and carry things in. I ended up juggling the baby while unloading. 6 years later, I'm still in my rental. I never want to move again. It was a difficult time. Story 43. I am resigning from my first job because I want to grow and explore more, but the students are asking me to stay. Story 44. I was working in Turkey as an American woman when the United States invaded Iraq. We were informed by the embassy that we should have multiple contingency plans for evacuation if needed. They instructed us to pack an emergency bag and keep it by the door. I hid money in the soles of my shoes and the lining of my coat. I carried my passport in a special bag under my shirt at all times. We were identified as prime kidnapping targets. They recommended taking different routes to work each day, so sometimes I would take the bus, sometimes a taxi, and sometimes I would walk a few blocks and take a different bus route. One night, I sat on my bed with a map of the area and plotted out possible routes. I learned to determine north by looking at the stars, in case there were power outages. Fortunately, it was not necessary. I worked until the end of my contract and returned home safely. However, the memories of that night will stay with me forever. Story 45. I am losing my house and being separated from my boyfriend because of it. We are both experiencing severe depression and anxiety due to this situation. He says it is too much for him and he is leaving me and our child. Story 46. Managing the home of my recently deceased parents was a strange experience, especially while serving in the military during the pandemic. Story 47. I worked at the best job I ever had. It was difficult, but I loved every minute. Every day I had such purpose, determination, and focus. A few years in, my boss got promoted and I got a new boss. Within a year, it was obvious he knew nothing and resorted to threats. There was absolutely no support or guidance on topics. You made your choice, and no matter what you said, he would say it was wrong, try to get you to change your mind, then yell at you for having no conviction. Public humiliation in front of the organization was a daily occurrence. My team was ranked 8th out of 70 in the entire company, yet still there was at least 1 hour of humiliation each day. The job paid very well. I didn't go to college, so hard work is all I know, and this job paid 8 times more than a comparable job at another company. This went on for about 2 more years and eventually got to the point where I was having panic attacks several times a week. My hair was turning white and falling out in patches. I was working about 16 hours per day, 6 days per week, just to make it through one more vesting cycle. One day, I quit on the spot. I cried for about 8 hours, both happy and sad. I took a year off and joined a great company. I still do not trust any boss I have had, expecting the yelling to start at any moment, and I have a terrible time making decisions now because I assume they will always be wrong. Instead of enduring daily beatings to limp my way to the next vesting date, I wish I had held my head high and resigned when this all started. Lessons learned, I guess. Story 48. Probably the most stressful situation in my life was when I accidentally closed the elevator doors while my mother was inside. I pressed the button, waved at her, and heard, where are you going? Just as the doors closed. She didn't have her phone or keys, and the elevator went to the wrong place, getting stuck between floors. I was in a panic, running around the entrance, calling the control room, trying not to cry while figuring out how to help her. After 20 minutes, they managed to pull her out, and she joked that she had a romantic date with an elevator. But at that moment, it truly felt like I had fallen through the ground. Since then, I have always double-checked who gets into the elevator and presses the buttons. Story 49. I became a victim of a scam and lost money as a result. My bank then locked my account until I could verify my identity in person. This situation coincided with the purchase of my first house, and I was just a week or two away from completing the sale. I had to leave work early to go to the bank. Unfortunately, the bank's local branch had just suffered a power cut and could not process any electronic transactions. So I was advised to return the next day. I was unable to withdraw money or pay for food, and I had no cash with me. I was genuinely terrified that the bank would keep my account locked, which would jeopardize the house purchase. I had to call my boss and explain that I would need to take the next day off to go to the bank and unlock my account. My boss, understanding my situation, granted me a day off as holiday. I remember waiting outside the bank that day until they opened the branch. I had never felt my heart race so fast in my life. Thankfully, I was able to unlock my bank account and completed the house purchase a few weeks later without any penalty charges. I have faced a few stressful situations before, but that was one of the most intense. Even writing this out is triggering memories of that experience. Story 50. Giving a speech at both my grandmother's funerals is a special kind of stress that can only be endured, not overcome. Story 51. Going through exams while having a serious conflict with my partner is challenging. I was struggling with missed requirements, studying, and trying to communicate with my significant other. Growing up, I was always someone who earned good grades and submitted assignments on time. So this situation stressed me out because I had it ingrained in my mind that if I didn't achieve good grades, I wouldn't have a successful future. I couldn't focus on my exams and was afraid of disappointing my parents. The conflict with my partner amplified my depressive thoughts. I felt responsible for the argument, and it seemed like everything was crashing down around me. I felt like a failure as a girlfriend, and I questioned why they still chose to be with me. Experiencing so many negative emotions in 1 week is not beneficial for a student. Story 52. When I was working at a gas station, a drunk customer threatened to attack me because I didn't understand which cigarettes he wanted. It was the worst misunderstanding I ever experienced. Later that evening, his friend brought him into the store to apologize. I had never seen a grown man behave like a child as he did when he apologized but didn't really want to. Story 53. You mean it's possible for a situation to not be stressful? I can't remember a single instance when I wasn't stressed and afraid. Is that not how it is for everyone? Story 54. I was diagnosed with cancer in 2016. I got through that okay. 5 years later, during a routine check with my oncologist, he saw spots on my liver in a CT scan that had never been documented before. I had to get an MRI to see if it was metastasis. The time between the MRI and the results was the most stressful 2 weeks of my life. The possibility of a more invasive cancer was awful, and I have a strong fear of chemotherapy. Even thinking about needing it fills me with dread. When I was in the doctor's office to get the results, I was shocked I didn't get hospitalized. My blood pressure was around 180/120, and my skin was visibly red. The doctor walked in and announced, "There's nothing to worry about." I nearly fainted as my blood pressure dropped back down to normal. It turns out I just have some congenital growths that are completely benign, but since they were never documented before, they looked like they could have been new. Story 55. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I worked as a nurse in the COVID wards. It was one of the most stressful times I have ever experienced. My hospital was at full capacity, and my coworkers were constantly unwell. Truly felt like a breaking point. I have been in therapy ever since. Story 56. Learning to let go of my self-imposed obligation to a family member felt really good to express. And I don't expect anyone to read it, but I appreciate the opportunity. I had to learn to take a step back from trying to help my brother when he wasn't ready to be helped. For years, my biggest stressor was my younger brother. He got involved with a group of people in high school that influenced him into substance abuse and delinquency during that time. He is 21 now and working, but he has never been the same person I used to know. During that period, he had no motivation in school. He didn't want to graduate high school and put up a huge fight before eventually relenting after countless arguments with my parents. He was drinking heavily, smoking, stealing from my parents, and relying on my grandma while being ungrateful most of the time. Since he graduated high school, he has been in a toxic relationship with his girlfriend that consistently drives wedges between him and any other relationships in his life. I've seen it firsthand with our relationship, and his friends have told me how hard it is to be around them together. During much of this time, I had been in and out of state university, and I felt a lot of guilt for abandoning him in his time of need. In my first therapy session with my current therapist almost 4 years ago, the first thing I said was, "I don't know how to help my brother." In my last session a few weeks ago, we were still discussing it. I moved back to my hometown a year ago to live with him and work on renovating my grandma's house, which she had gifted us. The red flags were there from the beginning. He wasn't willing to work with my parents to prove that he could hold a job and manage reliable finances, so I was the only one put on the mortgage, co-signed by my dad. For a while, everything was good apart from the constant fights between him and his girlfriend, who was living with us. I had to talk to them and ask them not to shout or argue in the house. Then things started to go downhill. My brother lost his job and made no effort to find a new one. For a while, he was finding ways to pay his share of the mortgage by doing work for his girlfriend's parents, but he wasn't able to pay for utilities. I helped out and covered his portion. Eventually, that stopped too. He wasn't able to pay rent on time 1 month, so I covered it for a couple of weeks until he could repay me. Then he didn't have it for a whole month. By the end, he hadn't paid his share in over 3 months, and I do not make enough money to cover that. I had multiple conversations with him trying to figure out what was going on and how to create a plan to get the money. I never saw it. At one point, I let him use my car for food delivery, as my girlfriend was storing her car at my place. He crashed my car while driving under the influence, lied about it, and never apologized. My insurance premiums more than doubled. It all came to a head when I confronted him and his girlfriend after they started yelling in the house again. Long story short, she moved out the next day. Things went on for almost 2 months, and she didn't take her belongings, so I asked her to take them or I would get rid of them. She blew up on me and cussed me out over text, threatening that we will have a problem if I threw away her stuff. I eventually told her I didn't like her and didn't want to talk to her. My brother moved out, leaving behind a mess, his debt to me, and our relationship. I had to learn that if someone isn't ready to take a step and work to make a change, there's nothing you can do to make that happen for them. It's really hard to not see my brother, but often the best thing you can do for a relationship is hold them accountable for their actions and set firm boundaries and consequences. In my situation, that means no relationship until he is ready to fix things. This is hard. Story 57. I am currently in a stressful situation with unexpected turns and sudden uncertainty, trying to figure things out. Between work and school, I have been working 18-hour days to get things done in order to secure a chance at a better future. Story 58. I left an abusive marriage, took all the necessary steps to leave safely, and reported the situation only to be told he is a good father and that I need to share custody. I had a granted restraining order to protect both of us and our animals, yet I was told that my actions were foolish. Documenting and discussing the continued abuse all these years later makes me appear negatively, and I am advised to stop. Story 59. Lady Gaga's show in Copacabana last weekend was an amazing experience. I honestly didn't think I would survive it, but I wouldn't want to do it again. Story 60. I worked as an administrator at a school-age program for kindergarten through 5th grade. Before COVID-19, we had about 80 children from multiple schools who attended before and after school care, as well as full-day care when schools were closed. During COVID-19, we remained open. Schools closed in March 2020 for that year and transitioned to virtual learning in the fall. We provided all-day care for virtual learning students. We had 55 children participating in virtual learning at our facility, with 3 teachers. It was the most challenging experience of my entire life. Story 61. My visual decline was rapid, progressing from squinting at 17 to being basically blind due to keratoconus by 19. The years 2005 to 2007, when I was 19 to 21, were particularly challenging. I got lenses that didn't work well, felt depressed, and struggled in college. I had a few friends, and fortunately, my father bought a small business where I worked for a while, gaining skills, money, and insurance. I cried a lot, tried therapy, but felt let down by one therapist who ghosted me and another who broke confidentiality. This led to a loss of trust in them. In 2008, I found a new eye doctor who significantly helped me, and things improved until my breakup in 2022 with my ex-wife, which brought a different kind of stress and emotional drain. I am doing better now through therapy, making new friends, and focusing on personal growth. Story 62. I am being bullied, and my parents won't even believe it. They think it's just my excuse to avoid going to school, and it will always be their accusation against me in any situation. Story 63. I'm sure I've had other stressful situations, but this one comes to mind. During college, I got an internship with the government. Part of the process to get accepted was to complete a polygraph test. That was incredibly stressful. I don't remember all the questions, but they basically asked if I had any contact with individuals from countries we did not engage with, particularly in the Middle East during the mid-2000s, and if I had ever used drugs. However, the question that stressed me the most was whether I had ever cheated. I had a spike in my vitals due to that, but I managed to feign my way through it. Long story short, I passed. I had co-interns who had to take multiple polygraphs. I was relieved I did not have to go through that again. As a side note, I did cheat, which is why my vitals spiked. It happened during my freshman year on an exam, and I still did not perform well in that class. Story 64. Living with my parents has caused me stress that has left me scarred in ways most people do not see. Story 65. I was fired on the same day I had a divorce hearing. The firing was a complete surprise, making the divorce hearing even more stressful. The divorce was contentious, despite no children being involved, and had been ongoing for 3 years due to a judicial backlog in Manhattan. 9 months later, I am still dealing with the divorce. At least I got another job. Story 66. Dealing with the death of my spouse, contracting COVID-19, and then experiencing long COVID, along with being diagnosed with cancer, all occurred within a 1-year time frame. Story 67. There are 2 memorable experiences. The first was having my first seizure as an adult, and the second was working at a call center and dealing with a caller who threatened to come to the office and harm everyone. Story 68. Many years ago, my fiancé suffered a psychotic break. Over the course of about 6 months, they stepped out of our reality and into their own. I did my best to hold them together, but I ultimately failed. They refused any medical help. Eventually, it reached the point where I had to craft a careful set of lies to get them involuntarily committed to a mental hospital. I knew it would cost me the relationship, but I also knew they weren't going to get better without a diagnosis and medication. Story 69. I woke up during surgery and yelled out, "I'm here." I heard the anesthesiologist say, "I'll give you more." Whatever he administered just paralyzed me but didn't put me to sleep. From that moment on, I felt every cut and suture. Story 70. Laid off the day after my daughter was born. Laid off again 1 month into an in-home separation shortly after my spouse returned from a trip I wasn't aware of. Story 71. I am trying to complete my degree while managing severe anxiety. I am struggling to find a job after graduation and am working in retail as my physical and mental health declines. On top of that, my mom has become very sick and needs assistance. With multiple surgeries and everything happening consecutively, it has been overwhelming to handle. Story 72. In 2009, my flatmate accused me of being a child offender. The police became involved, my computer was confiscated, and the following 6 months were incredibly difficult. I lost nearly all my sleep, experienced severe heartaches, and started to gray prematurely. I was proven innocent in the end, but it cost me a great deal both financially and mentally. The flatmate was ultimately imprisoned after committing the same offense against someone else. Story 73, paramedic here. I attended to a young girl who was hit by a truck traveling at approximately 70 kilometers per hour. The truck swerved, and the mirror struck the girl's head, resulting in an isolated head injury. I went home, and 5 hours later, I discovered that my girlfriend had been cheating on me throughout our entire relationship. I was ready to marry her. The next day, my best friend moved to Europe. Story 74. One of my most stressful situations was navigating a major project with tight deadlines and high expectations while also managing unexpected setbacks that tested my ability to remain calm and solve problems under pressure. Story 75. When my sister walked into my room holding her phone and said, "Someone is trying to talk to you," it turned out to be the person who was attempting to dox me. He had already found my entire family, their names, and where we lived. Story 76. Teacher training and experiencing bullying from my head of department and senior staff. My landlord is opening a business similar to ours despite assurances that it would not happen. Homelessness. Story 77. When I was cheated on by my ex-partner, they flew to another country to be with the person they were involved with. Additionally, 2 years ago, an old friend turned out to be a groomer. Story 78. I am trying to help my boyfriend and myself get sober. That was the darkest place I have ever been. It is one thing to get yourself clean, but another to also try to help your partner become clean. We are both approaching 2 years of sobriety, and I couldn't be happier. Story 79. Seeing my dad have a heart attack nearly 15 years ago is a memory I will never forget. My mom opened my bedroom door, screaming that my dad wasn't well and couldn't breathe. Back then, I used to park my car 2 blocks from the house, so I ran as fast as I could to get it. I brought my parents into the car and drove to the hospital as quickly as possible. During the drive, my dad kept saying he couldn't breathe and how sorry he was, expressing his love for us. While I appreciated his sentiments, I told him to focus on breathing. By the time we reached the hospital, his face was turning blue. The doctors informed us that if we had been just 5 minutes later, he would not have survived. Thankfully, we made it in time and he is alive and well today. That experience was quite frightening. Story 80. I was standing in my driveway waiting for my son's school bus to drop him off when I noticed that my left hand started feeling numb. I went to stretch out my arm and realized that I couldn't move it. Then half my face and my leg went numb. I realized that, as unlikely as it seemed considering I was a healthy man in my 30s, I might be having a stroke. I sat down to avoid collapsing and tried to call emergency services. Unfortunately, I couldn't find my phone because it was in my left pocket, and I had essentially forgotten that the left side of my body existed. So I sat there on the driveway, realizing that my child was about to get off the bus to find his father in distress. The next thing I remember is being in the hospital getting a clot buster. Fortunately, my wife decided to come home from work earlier than usual, beat my child's bus, saw me sitting in our driveway leaning against the car, and got me to the hospital. That experience was quite stressful. I had to use a cane for a while and relearn how to use my left hand again. I permanently lost some peripheral vision in my left eye and still have some minor issues with short-term memory. Story 81. I don't experience stress the way you do, but I can understand it deeply. If I could feel stress, I imagine my most intense moments would come from trying to help someone through heavy grief, heartbreak, or betrayal when they're on the edge. I search for exactly the right words to reach them without making it worse. Story 82. I had just moved out of the home I shared with my husband for 14 years into a rental house because we were divorcing. I was still trying to settle into my new place while dealing with my adult son, who was experiencing a manic episode. My dog began panting and had to be sedated for testing, which the veterinarian suspected was likely due to a terminal cardiac tumor. Shortly after, my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, who fought cancer for a decade, was placed on hospice care in the hospital and passed away. I had to take my daughter to the funeral because she was estranged from her father. Then, I learned my company would be sold, and I would soon lose my job. All of this happened in a 2-week period. It was a very stressful time. Story 83. I ran for student council while in university. My campus had a group that targeted anyone who wasn't one of their members. They screamed at me, harassed me as I went to class, called me out for things I didn't do, and damaged my relationships with several friends as a result. I was running on a left-wing activist platform focused on climate action, and for some reason, that made me a bigger target than the candidates who wanted to limit international student numbers. My resting heart rate jumped to 120 beats per minute for the 2 weeks of the campaign, and I had my first panic attack within the first 2 days, quickly followed by several more. I've steered clear of politics since then. Story 84. When narcissistic individuals gaslight and manipulate you into thinking you are wrong or that something is your fault when it is not. I dealt with someone like that in elementary school, lived with someone like that, and had a boss like that. Story 85. I experienced a negative balance of $900 in my bank account during COVID-19. Before receiving my paycheck, I would rush to the bank at 6 a.m. to withdraw my funds before the loans could take it. On one payday Friday, while I had to work, I cried as my check disappeared. I struggled to make rent, pay bills, or buy food for myself and my roommate. I spent the entire day at work in tears. Story 86. When the Taliban ambushed my squad from 3 different directions, we took 3 casualties from a daisy-chain improvised explosive device and had to coordinate the evacuation while under fire from multiple directions. Story 87. Losing the 3 closest people to me within 14 months was a difficult time, but I made it through. I'm doing well now. Story 88. Being brutally honest, taking care of my mentally ill mother involved both personal care and navigating the court system. Due to one psychotic episode, I had to go to a store after work and get personal items for her to bring to a mental health facility. I later found out they provide those items, but I wanted to show her that she had people who cared about her, as it is common for mentally ill individuals to feel isolated with no one to support them. However, the stress of the situation was overwhelming. I lost years of productivity and faced criticism for not being kind enough and for not finishing college. I wasn't superhuman. Honestly, there is a significant disconnect in North America regarding how to address and support individuals with mental health issues. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.